Hi again then guys, and welcome to another movie breakdown and review from SHM. And as you'll have seen from the title, the particular movie in question this time is the 2002 movie by the name of Reign of Fire. Now, Reign of Fire is a film that doesn't garner a huge amount of conversation, not generally speaking anyway, but I would personally say, and this of course is just my opinion, that it's probably the best dragon-based movie I've seen. Now, I know a lot of people would probably say Dragonheart would be the best candidate for that, but personally, I don't rate Dragonheart all that highly. It's a little bit cheesy, whereas Reign of Fire is portraying dragons, in the live-action sense at least, as they should be shown. They don't have personalities, they don't have character, they are pure killing machines. And were they to be real, this film would probably pan out exactly as it does. The film is set in a dystopian future after dragons come up from under the earth and basically cause the end of the majority of humanity. Which is entirely believable, considering that a dragon is basically the ultimate predator. Now, the film stars a pretty good cast. There are two primary characters of Christian Bale and Matthew McConaughey, and two very good supporting characters played by Gerard Butler and Isabella Scorupco. And they're very enjoyable characters. Christian Bale is good at playing a sullen, down-on-his-luck kind of guy. He plays that quite a bit, such as in Batman, that kind of brooding character. He's similar in this, and he has a very unique perspective on the dragons, because of something that you see at the start of the film. McConaughey, on the other hand, plays, on the surface, a very happy-go-lucky army type, an American guy, as he is, of course, in real life, who wades into the situation and seems to be kind of the villain of the movie, at least the human villain. And that is great to see McConaughey playing that role. McConaughey is absolutely shredded physically for the role in the film, and he looks the part. He's got no hair, a big beard, and he looks gritty, grimy. He looks like a badass in the film. That's exactly how he should look. Now, as far as breaking the film down into our 5 points, first of all, of course, we will discuss the story and plot of the film. Now, the story is simple on the surface. As already mentioned, dragons come up from underground, from a hibernation of sorts, and wreak havoc on the earth. And that's not a spoiler, that's the entire premise of the movie. So that's a relatively simple one in itself, but what it does with that is almost like the dragon equivalent of something like The Matrix, because you have this very dilapidated dystopian future inhabited by a few survivors in pocket groups, using very finite resources and weapons to keep their little pods of people alive against massive, overpowering forces that in a head-to-head battle they wouldn't stand a chance against. So very similar in that regard to The Matrix, with the Sentinels and the robots overall. Now, for the story and plot, it's a relatively simple overall plot, but what they do with it is very good. The characters are interesting. They have a way in the film of acting like life is hard, but not in a depressing kind of way. The film is not depressing by any means. It's a very interesting look at a dystopian future, a future which is primarily, as you'd expect it to be, based on ash. Ash is everywhere, as you'd expect, considering dragons are essentially now the top of the food chain on the earth. Now, for the story and plot, I'm going to give the film a 7. It's not the cleverest of films ever, but it certainly does a lot with what it's given, and as I said, for me personally, as far as dragon films go, it does exactly what it should do with those dragons. It doesn't drive some stake through the dragon's heart and have done with it. These dragons are formidable. One of them would be enough to make the whole movie about. There's not one of them. There are hundreds of them, if not thousands, and these dragons are, every single one of them, capable of wiping out thousands of humans. So for the story and plot, it's a definite 7. As far as the characters and their motivations, I already kind of touched on that with McConaughey and Bale. The characters are easy to root for. Initially, you root for Christian Bale because he's the main character. Gerard Butler is always easy to like in films. When McConaughey comes in, you assume that him and his men are, to some extent, the antagonists. Initially, they can seem like that, but they just have a different approach to things. They're much more of an on-the-road kind of gang than Christian Bale, who prefers to stay in one place, fortify, and try and find some way of life in that method. So he's not so much an antagonist to Christian Bale as much as someone with a different viewpoint. And that plays out really well between them. The other characters are great as well, but it really does rely on them. And the dragons as well, as characters, are very good. They don't talk, they're not fluffy, they're not cuddly, they're not cartoonish. They're killers. So for the characters and their motivations, again, I'm going to give it a 7. Not necessarily the deepest performances ever, but definitely good. As far as the overall visuals, the look of the film, and of course the special effects, which, as I've mentioned on this channel before, is highly important for any monster, creature or alien-based film, I'm very happy to say that they really do pull it off. The fact that the dragons are, for the most part, CGI lets it down from being necessarily a perfect 10 for me. Obviously, you couldn't make dragons of that scale doing the things that they're doing with animatronics. But the fact that it is CGI, even though it is very good CGI, can still take you out of the moment sometimes. However, the film looks fantastic. The dragons look amazing, especially the scenes where they utilise fire. And so overall, for the visual look of the film, and for the special effects, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Now, I may have expected or wanted that to be higher if you have already seen the movie, and I can understand that opinion. If it were down purely to the dragons, I would probably give it a 9, but this is also based on the overall look of the film, and although the film is a realistic dystopian future, as I mentioned before, the majority of the scenery is very grey, slate-like, ash everywhere, so there's not really much visually to go on, and that lets it down a little bit as opposed to purely the look of the dragons, which is fantastic. As far as the overall audio, soundtrack, music of the film, sounds of the dragons, etc., I'm going to give it a 6, because the music doesn't stand out all that much, which is good because it doesn't take away from the moment. The dragons sound pretty good, but you don't necessarily hear them that often, they tend to be in the distance, and the overall audio is good, but there's not much to it. By the nature of a dystopian future, there aren't that many people around to make noise, so the dialogue is dialogue, and apart from that, there's not that much noise to go on. So it's certainly above a flat line of 5, but not necessarily anything to jump around about. Finally, for the rewatchability and entertainment factor, which, as I've mentioned on this channel before, is the most personal and subjective, of course, to me, I'm going to give the film an 8. Because for me personally, it's not the kind of film that I would necessarily want to pop in and watch every day, but it's definitely a highly entertaining film. If you are a fan of dragons, which a lot of people really are, collecting statues of them, etc., if you're that kind of person, and if you're a fan of gothic or dilapidated imagery, dystopian future kind of films, people struggling to survive with less than the ideal situations, it certainly fulfills on all those fronts. The dragons are fantastic, they steal the film, it's about them, and so, overall for that, I'm going to give it an 8. It's not the most rewatchable film ever made, there are other films which I would rather watch instead of it, but nonetheless, it is a highly entertaining film, and my overall verdict is going to be for Reign of Fire. If you haven't seen the film, which some people still haven't, the film made roughly 82 million on a budget of 60 million, so it did pretty well, not amazing, but pretty well. And if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out, especially if, as I said just now, you are a fan of dragons, and I think you'll probably like it. If you're a fan of dragons specifically, you'll probably love it, If you're not particularly into dragons but just looking for a dystopian future kind of film, it's certainly an interesting alternative to the more obvious choice of aliens, robots, etc. And for our overall combined score, this film gets a pretty respectable 3.6 out of a possible 5, which is a pretty good rating considering it's not necessarily the most talked about of movies. But that's it for my review of 2002's Reign of Fire. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.